morning, Grace.
Hi.
How are you today?
You snuck that in on me. I was like, morning.
No problem. And welcome to our listeners in today's episode.
Hi, everybody.
Can you see what I see? It's Vicky Scott here, and today my co-host Grace Hart and I want to talk about control. Now, control is a very common word, and it can have both a positive and a negative energy around it. But first, I wonder how our listeners went with our last episode on boundaries and checking in on their own boundaries to see if they were still serving them, or whether, like me, I started recognising I still have a couple that were relevant once, but they don't really work for me anymore. So I guess I'm learning, in my view, it's just about making conscious choices every day and not staying on autopilot. How did you go, Grace, with checking in on your boundaries?
I was just, as you were talking, I was like, yep, that's pretty much what I went through. You know, life is a constant creation, and if you're not creating it, someone else or something else is creating it for you, right?
Oh, I like that. Oh.
And that's giving up control in not a good way. So,
yes.
Yeah, but it's not about controlling your creation. It's just about not being in control or being controllable.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So that's talking about different energies around us. And, So anyway, we're already here. Today's episode is about control. So what can you see about our world in relation to control?
I guess what's pinging when you say that is just the sadness in that moment when you said that we deny our very being. We disconnect from what we know and what we'd like to create. And instead of controlling in a sense of what would I like to create, we stop ourselves, we negate our very being. And I'd like that to change. I see a world where we're not controlled by others and we actually create in a generative way.
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely, given that we're all individuals and we've all come for our very own journeys, and if we don't live what we came here to do, then it's not going to get done, is it? So, those words around creation, I like that.
And also, from trauma especially, when you're traumatized, you tend to want to control your reality. I'm never going to let that happen to me again, or I'm never going to let a person like that do that to me again. And that's the kind of control that I would love to invite you to not choosing. So you can be aware, you can acknowledge, it doesn't work for me when someone yells at me, or it doesn't work for me when this happens. That's fine. Acknowledge what you do not want and what you do want. However, don't create from that energy. Create from just that generativeness of, who would I like to create with? What would I like to create? Who would I like to be?
I like that. Well, control, the word, is both a noun and a verb. And I like what you're saying about in the same sentence as creation, controlling, because as a noun it does mean the power to influence or even direct people's behaviours or a course of events. So you could say you're in creation mode at that moment when you are in control, which is a very positive thing about, that's the purpose of us, isn't it, as an individual?
Yeah, maybe create your life, don't control your life.
How much lighter does that feel?
Yeah.
Yay.
Control your bladder, always a good thing to do. But there's only a few select areas where you really would appreciate control.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's also part of living, isn't it? We want to create and help our body serve us, so that it does. We can do what it needs to do to stay well enough for us to fulfil on what we want to achieve in this lifetime.
Actually, you make a really good point, because it's really not about controlling your bladder.
No.
It's actually loving your body and being present with your body. And, when your body's happy and it's not holding on to trauma, it knows that it's probably not a good idea to have, wee running down your leg 24/7, right? It would know.
Yeah.
So it's more about really being in communion and creation with your body and in your life. Oh, that sounds so deep.
It does. But, you know, the purpose of Can You See What I See and what we wanted to do is to have a different talk about, well, what does that mean? And to actually just at least have a look at it to see if there's something in our own lives that we could look at differently. Put a different lens
You mean
in.
we're inviting a potential possibility versus trying to control someone to see what we see?
Absolutely. The old story. We're just putting it on the supermarket shelf. People can choose.
Exactly. And we all know what it feels like when someone's trying to control the narrative or they've got an agenda. We know what that feels like. And why would you do that to yourself?
But, you know, often when that happens, it's been my experience, maybe just, you know, I'm in my late 60s, and it's that thing about I tend to avoid those people or those situations and I switch off to it. And now I recognise that, you know, I matter too. And not that I have to say anything to the other person or persons, but it would be, and I would do it differently if I had it over again with the same experiences, I guess. But it's okay to say I have a different view without being in competition or without trying to get into an argument. And that's where it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if we weren't trying to control a conversation or an outcome, and we could actually have a discussion rather than an argument or a debate, as some people call it, when I think, yeah, we do need to have some more frank conversations about things.
You know, you say that so beautifully, and that's a great example because, you know, if we were chatting and I wanted to control it, I want Vicky to see what, you know, my rightness of the point of view, I want Vicky to do this or do that, and that's not communication. That's not, you know, creating with you, right? And how many times do we see when we're talking, people are not really listening. They're just wanting to get their point across next. They're already thinking about it and cultivating it in their head, and they're not really present with you.
Yeah,
you know,
so they're not really open to seeing what someone else can see, basically.
Exactly. We're too scared. We don't want to change. You know, and ultimately when we come into a conversation, there's got to be that willingness to change. And I don't mean just necessarily changing your point of view. I mean change. You know, because if you come into a conversation being willing to be changed, it's such a gift because then you can see different possibilities and you can choose for yourself. And that's not the same as being controlled or being gaslit. It's actually just being willing to be changed. You have the choice, you know, and of course, as you just said so beautifully, it's not about, you know, let's get into a slinging match of let me prove to you how right I am, therefore how wrong you are, instead of like, okay, Vic, what can we create? You know, you've got your point of view, I've got my point of view. What can we create together?
I like that. And, you know, there's an expression I heard once that really appealed to me about somebody saying, you know, if you keep looking in the rear vision mirror, you're going to run into something. So rather than look out through the windscreen and see where you're going, we keep looking at, and that can be about because we've believed something in the past or because we have had an experience that resulted in not a good outcome for us, we will tend to shrink our world and want to control it more. And I really get that, yes, you can have a glance in the rear vision mirror to see if there's something you're missing you want to take forward, but it's not a good idea to just keep looking at this, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically in a nutshell how we control ourselves. We either run away from something or run towards something else, you know, and instead of what do I want to create? Let's not look at what we want to run away from or avoid, you know, or run to that mystery, wonderful thing that will save us, you know, that we tend to, I mean, I know for me from the trauma spectrum, initially I see them like layers of a building, and you know, you need to acknowledge the suffering of whatever's happened, the woundedness, and then you can go to the next floor and the next floor and the next floor. So yes, you have to acknowledge it. You know, some people call it validation, but for me it's more about acknowledgement that I'm feeling really scared right now, or I'm terrified right now, or I feel like it's never going to change or never going to end. Important for you to acknowledge. And then we can go into, okay, acknowledging that that's true for me, what can I choose now? What else is possible here? And, you know, and then there's numerous things out there like the flower we talk about, how do I get back to the center of the flower? Yeah.
Yes, it's such a good, I always visualize like a sunflower when I think of the flower.
I do too. That's exactly, and with a big smile in the middle. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, same. So there's the stem, which is sort of like how we're connected to Mother Earth, and then the centre of the flower, which feels so strong, and then all the petals around it. And they're yellow, which I love, sunshine and bright.
Yeah. Actually, that just reminds me, I did have quite a substantial trigger. It's probably been over 8 years or so since I got triggered that badly. And so one of the things I did was go for a walk, and right now we've got some orange blossoms coming out and lemon trees, and there's, oh my gosh, the smell is amazing. And so I went down there and I went, okay, I'm going to put my face in a bunch of, orange blossoms. And so I put my nose down, and as I was just getting to the thing, I saw this queen bee, of all bees, and just asleep in the middle of
Really?
Yeah, and then I was looking around, and there were lots of bees humming because they're really just come out now, and as in the flowers and the bees, and there were a few little bees having a snooze, and they always snooze in the center of the flower. I didn't know they sleep a long time. They don't just sleep in their little hives; they sleep on flowers quite a few hours a day. Yeah, so it was really cute. There was this bee just in the center of the flower having some center of the flower time.
I like that. Yeah, ready to pollinate something.
Oh, actually, that's I'm liking that. Go to your centre of the flower, and from there pollinate. It's like, what do you want to create? Sprinkle that stuff.
I will, yeah. I was having a look on YouTube about control, and there are many, many videos out there. There's one about controlling and manipulative people. And there was one there about how nice people control you.
Oh, yeah, through their niceness.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more? What do you see when you see that?
Well, there's just different kinds of perpetrators, aren't there? There's sadistic ones and violent ones, and there's ones that are sweet as honey. And but all of them have similar tactics in that, there's isolation there. There's some form of threats, there's criticism, there's usually love bombing at the start. So yeah, it's really just their strategy. And gaslighting, for example, is one of the it can be incredibly harmful, because what tends to happen is gaslighters choose truth with a fabricated thread through it. And that's why it really messes with you, because when you hear the sentence, it's true. And so you don't have the cognition, unless you're taught this, to split the sentence. Like I give the example of, gee, Vic, that dress looks really nice on you. If you lose a few more kilos, it'll look even better, right? So
ouch.
What's really true is that dress looks really nice on you. So you feel a lightness. You think, oh, that's, yeah. And then the twisted lie comes in that's sewn so beautifully through it.
Like the knife then comes.
And that's where it hurts, because it's connected to a truth, and that's what's so confusing. And unless you actually get, that's what gaslighting is. It makes you question your reality, because that dress looks good on you. You feel good in that dress. That's what's true. And then all of a sudden they've interweaved this. Well, you don't really look good in it. It's a great dress, but your body doesn't look good in it. That's actually what they're saying. You don't look good.
But, the media is also picked up on that, and that's how they get you in, isn't it? With, might be what you look like, but you could look even better if you do ABC or whatever it is they want to sell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's also spiritual gaslighting. If you learn this mantra, you'll get even better at this. And so, but really what it's saying is you're not good enough at that. And so you've got to be really careful when and who, yes, absolutely. Media, certain religions can gaslight, and your best friend, you might not even, until you know what it smells like, it can, but gaslighting always gives you this kind of wonk, this kind of twistedness, like, I know it seems like they're helping me or they've just paid me a compliment, but why am I feeling so weird with it? And usually that's gaslighting.
Oh. Wow. Yeah, well, see, this controlling thing too, it's that one, gaslighting's one way of doing it. You know,
Or secret agendas. Secret agendas is another one where, you know, it's like, I want this to happen. And so I'm going to say, for example, let's say, you know, that you're in a family and one person in the family wants to control an outcome. I want this to happen in this way. And so what I could say to somebody is, oh, you know, you haven't made really good choices in the past and I really care about you. So I'm going to just take over and do this because it's in your best interest. But really what's happening is I have my agenda. I want to go this way, but I'm going to gaslight you, manipulate you in a bastardized, caring way so I can get my agenda met. And unfortunately, if you are traumatized in any way and you are spending more of your time on petals, your disassociated parts than the center of the flower, you're not going to know what's happening. You're going to be bulldozed. And you may even actually believe the narrative, like, oh yeah, she does care about me. You know, she doesn't yell at me, so therefore she cares about me. She doesn't, oh, therefore, you know, or he or whatever it is. And we need to look at what is, not what we hope or their agenda. You know, being bulldozed by their agenda.
You know, that sort of sounded similar to what one of the YouTube videos was talking about, and they called it concern shaming. Because, you know,
wow, I have not heard that. That's an energy match. Tell me more.
Yeah, well, it's just, you know, if people around you, say growing up, and people around you have been so out of control, you could often end up being a controlling person just to feel like you are in control. And different ways that can be expressed is that concern shaming. So it's where, you know, where people make subtle criticisms at you, expressing doubts about your capability and saying, I'm only raising this because I'm concerned about you.
And it stinks, right? You know it. Something feels off. Yeah.
Well, it does, you know, and really it's that thing around boundaries we've talked about. You know, for teens it might be okay, but when it gets to you doing it to adults, and I have to confess, I think I probably said this to my adult kids, so I take that on the nose.
Well, you know, I just want to say, what if we changed that narrative instead of saying, you know, took it on the nose? What it's like, wow, you know, I made a choice and now I've got more information and I'm so grateful I'm the person that can now take that on board and choose something different.
I like that.
Yeah.
I couldn't see it back then, but I can see it now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's other ways people try and control us in a nice way too, like they might just always be late for things or just,
yes.
You know, and it's another form of control, isn't it, really? But they don't see it that way. But, you know, and if someone doesn't want to be responsible for their own lives, then, and instead of dealing with their own stuff, they're making someone else responsible. So, you know, it's your fault if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have been upset or, you know, anyway, start to control all that about how we live our life. Hey, it's nice actually, you know, I always think you can't see it in the moment when you're in it, but it's nice to have some awareness around, oh, yeah, hang on, that's what just happened to me. And it didn't feel good. You know you don't feel good about it, but you don't know why, and you get in your head about
and we need to we need to be educated, and we need to start naming this. And you know, I mean, for example, with domestic violence and really any form of control, any form of abuse involves control and power. They're the two things. So whether it's domestic violence or financial control or whatever, there's control and power. And so if you recognize those energies, then you can start to go, okay, you know, when they said that was them trying to control me.
Yeah.
You know, when they said that, I felt this power push, like they were, you know, pushing themselves on me. Their agenda. Yeah.
Since domestic violence has been at the forefront, you know, in our community, sadly, you know, it's probably always happened, but because we now have more media that makes us more aware of the awful things that happen, they have now started to name coercive control. And, I know it's been defined as an act of assault or threat or humiliation and intimidation or other abuse that is used to harm, punish or frighten their victim.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested to read where it said it creates invisible change.
Yeah.
So it's that thing about you can't name it because you can't see it. It's invisible when you're in that place, that sense of fear that it pervades all elements of a victim's life. I know you and I have talked about this in relation to the experience you've had with domestic violence. What does coercion look like in your experience?
Well, it's interesting that you use the word invisible. And, for me, it's invisible, but it's invisible from the perspective of taken on its own. It doesn't have the smell of abuse. And I always use the example of like a rock, and this drop of water just goes drip, drip. And so if you just sort of pulled out one of those drips and went, is this abuse? You go, no, it's not. It's just a statement, or it's just a comment, but when you've been abused, drip, 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 your fear of the next drop coming, let alone hitting you, is terrifying in itself, because you acknowledge your very nature is being recrafted to that of the abuser's wishes. You are losing, with every drip, you are losing who you are as a being, your connection to that being, and you are morphing yourself into that which the abuser desires. And so so that next drop is terrifying. And this is the thing about coercion, because, for example, if I said to you, oh, Vic, you're so silly when you say things like that, right? If you just take just that one little statement, come on, that's nothing. But if you're getting continual acknowledgement of you being silly, stupid, worthless, useless, fat, ugly, a waste of space, the rock who you are starts to change. And then you lose connection with your gut, connection with your very being. And usually it's like the frog in water. It's not an overnight, it's not like a sledgehammer has come and cut one of the bits of your rock off. It's been this gradual thing that if you don't pay attention, next thing you know, you're a completely different shaped rock, and it's like, who am I?
Yeah. I know that coercive control does cause trauma. All the research and science around trauma and its impact on our bodies. It's obviously now becoming much more known from a medical perspective as well about how our body holds the impact of a trauma by it holds the energy of it.
Yeah, every statement, every look is a punch to the body. Every comment or judgment, it gets locked into the body. And when you get to the point where that person's connecting emotions like fear and terror and worry and anxiety with a statement, then you start to really not only believe the narrative, you take it on as true, and then you start telling everybody else. And, it's very common for domestic violence survivor victims to say, no, you don't understand. This is never going to change. And they believe it in all their heart. But part of that is that indoctrination of the drip, 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 drip. And, they need to get that coercion or, whether it's PTSD is an injury. You haven't been broken. It's an injury, and you can heal the brain.
Well, it is stored in our tissue. So it's not an overnight job to heal it, is it?
No.
But if we don't heal it, I know that's where things, it really does erode our body's health. And one thing that I was interested to read about, how you do heal from trauma is it is about through the emotions. And it's about then rebalancing that. And I think there's, Dr. Stephen Porges writes about brain has been dysregulated, and the way to regulate it again is through, it's human touch, person to person, but and it's around the emotions. He's done a lot of work around this in the last 20 years or more, I think, and he's convinced that many of the diseases that we see in isolation, and sometimes thinking, and they've been said they're generational, but they're actually as a result of unresolved trauma as well, and that can come down through generations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know that I'm super passionate about if you don't release the trauma in the body, your body will create events, situations, circumstances to release that trauma. And that can look like, you know, creating a conflict or jumping into another relationship that's abusive. And so for me, it's more about, hey, let's not wait till we're, you know, the body's choosing actual events and situations to release. Let's look at how we can release it without having the actual experience of more abuse. And, you know, there's numerous ways. And yes, I do also agree that it's connected to our emotions. And that's the thing, you've got to choose. We're not experts, you know, and definitely, you know, my advice would be to speak to someone who's trauma-informed. But there's also so many other modalities out there that if you find works, like for me, Peter Levine's work is gold. And I love the exercises that he has to release trauma out of the body. And that's not saying he's the only person. For me, there's other people as well that I work with, their modalities. But it's really, there's so much out there, which is great.
I did look up trauma informed, I guess, psychologists or counsellors, and I guess that's a fine line too, isn't it? You know, there are many who say they exactly. Are experienced in trauma healing or healing from trauma. But you had some not very successful experiences, didn't you? Until you found the latest one you've had.
Yeah, I mean, I actually studied to be a counsellor, and I did lots of great modalities. You know, I learned Sandtray and expressive therapy, for example, and all of them helped me with my trauma to some extent. However, me even using the word trauma back then, I actually did not connect trauma to me, even though it's ludicrous to think of it now. Of course, it's blatantly traumatic what I went through, but I didn't connect that word to it, and so it was more. When I spoke to different people, it was making a change, but not having a remarkable change. And it wasn't until I connected with a domestic violence counsellor who not only is trauma informed, she has such a great capacity to unpack that. And so, you know, for me, don't assume that every psychologist or every psychiatrist, even if they say they've, you know, on their website they're trauma informed, check them out and give them a trial run. You know, it's like a test drive. And, you know, because the gift of my particular counsellor, there's no words. I mean, and the thing is, it's now affecting my clients and, you know, my products. It's long reaching. And one of the things that she talked about is with domestic violence, you know, but really all trauma, it can be a long rescue. It's not an overnight, oh, now I've got the cognition, you know, I've got trauma or I've got this. It's a long rescue sometimes. And that's being patient. You know, a lot of people go, shouldn't I have dealt with that already? Or, you know, it's already been 2 years, you know, how come I'm still in grief or whatever? And it's like, no, trauma is trauma. It's complex. It'll take as long as it takes.
You know, that brings me back to, hang on, what's our life about? Isn't it a journey about getting to know ourselves and to be the best that we can be? But often when something like this comes up, the first thing we want to do is just get over it and, quote, heal ourselves, unquote, so we can get on with life. But we forget that is life. And as, like in your case, I can see how, you know, everything you said you weren't aware of it before, but you couldn't see what you couldn't see back then.
Yeah, exactly.
You see it when you're ready. But it's because of you. I know how many lives you've impacted and, in fact, have saved lives of individuals because you've been able to show them something they couldn't see before. So I really get that it's not a bad thing because until you've experienced something, I often think about this with Wendy. You know, I'm a white woman, and you know, I work with Wendy in the Stars Institute of Learning and Leadership, and I can't understand what Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have gone through. I can say I can, and I can do a lot of research, and I can understand the history of whatever, but I don't know what it's like. You know, I used to think, you know, I worked in Indigenous affairs for many years, but I went home to my own family and closed my own front door. But they went home to the same thing, you know, and to everything. And there's so much richness in that. But it's also a melting pot of life itself. And so, you know, what I'm trying to say is, until you've experienced something yourself, I think it's from that place that we become better able to share. And it's not about teaching others, it's just about sharing your own experience of what worked and what, I guess, didn't at that time.
That is, yeah, exactly. I so agree with you. It's like, you know, you can read all the books on how to swim, but unless you've actually jumped in the water and felt what it's like to float in the water against your skin and feeling like you're going to drown or whatever it is, you know, and it's really interesting because, as I said, I ran my own groups and sound therapy groups and all that sort of stuff way before I did this domestic violence counselling. And when I did this particular counselling, one of the things they offered was an 8-week domestic violence program. And this wasn't a support group where you tell your sad stories. It was a group where it was structured, and they just taught you different things, like this is how you do a parrot phrase, and this is the smart brain, and, you know, it was that sort of stuff. But what for me blew me away, and I had never experienced it before, they listened differently. And, you know, I've got a very close friend who is the kindest, sweetest person I know. And she totally is, she's sad with what I went through. She's incredibly empathetic. She has had trauma in her own life to some extent. But she says, you know, I can do my best to be present with what you went through. However, even that level of kindness and caring was completely different to these strangers who just heard with different ears. And, you know, and for example, I just ran a group this morning, and I just told them about the trigger thing that just happened, and the energy was very much, when I have shared it, is, you mean that still happens to you? You know, you're not this perfect, you know, angel sounding. And I was like, no, triggers are triggers, and you work around the majority of them. But this particular trigger was directly related to, you know, I gave the example of, you know, being in a torture chamber in Afghanistan, and say you were there for 9 years and you finally freed yourself, and, you know, you made a promise to yourself never, ever, ever to, you know, go back to Afghanistan again. And no disrespect to Afghanistan, this is what came to my mind as an analogy. And there was this moment where I was offered, by circumstance, to get on a plane back to Afghanistan, and I just lost it. And so you've got to realise that it's a bit like contractions. You know, when you get triggered, the pain is there, the contraction's there, but as soon as you deal with the trigger, you're back to no pain, the in-between of the contractions. And so the job of a trauma therapist, is to, let's say initially your drip, drip, drip was every second. You know, you're abusing yourself or you're suffering every second. And then through working with the trauma therapist, they come every 5 minutes or maybe once a day, and then it goes to, you know, once a week, and it's not as simple as that, but, you know, the time in between spreads out, and then there comes a time, and I did not believe this was true when it was told to me. She said, one day you're going to wake up and you're just going to feel this weird feeling, and it's actually you being happy. And I actually forgot about it, because it was a good nearly 2 years for me. And I woke up and I just felt really weird. And I called my best friend and I said, what is this? And she goes, you sound happy. And I went, this is happiness. And it was so different.
I didn't recognise it.
I didn't know what it was. I thought something was just really weird, and that something was wrong. And I've woken up strange. I need to fix it. Yeah. And of course now it's like that's become my more normal. And, you know, as I said, it was like good 8 years since I've had that Afghanistan trigger happen. So, yeah.
Gee, but yeah, you're quite right. And, you know, that's where, as you said, it was invisible to you for some time, but that's where we need our team around us that we trust, you know, we trust that they'll shine the light on what may be in our blind spot, but not from a place of judgment, just asking a better question, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, but to be in the place to even receive that, you've got to be in the center of your flower, because if you're functioning from predominantly disassociation or a disassociative part that you think is you, and someone says, "Hey, I've just noticed you're not as happy as you were before in this relationship," that caretaker part or that manager part or, you know, that protector part will say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." It might snap back or separate from that person. And this is the thing actually with people who are in a, you know, say your sister or your brother or a friend of yours is dating someone who's controlling, and you're like, how do I tell them? You know, I always say to them, it's so important for you to not be what the abuser is. And so the abuser's controlling. So if you start to go controlling back, like you shouldn't be with that person, that person's a bad person, I don't like the way he's treating you, then one of the things, especially with coercion, is that to go against that person, because there's rules that end up showing up, it's actually an abuse to that person that you love. So it's a warped sense of thing that you can't go against who you love. And so if someone from the outside is saying something that makes for you to agree to that is going against your partner, they're not going to agree to it. They're going to actually fight for the rightness of their point of view and go even closer to that partner and separate from you.
And pushes the other away.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I guess what people say that marks what control is not who decides, but who decides who decides.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, Vic, no, you can go out with your friends. You've got choice. You can go out. But but Vic knows if I go out and I come back, I'm going to get into so much trouble. So I'm the one that's really choosing here, even though it looks like you have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, gee. You know, there's so many. I think what we'll do, Grace, you've got so many resources and books and things, but I'll put a few of them on the website too, so people can go and look up for themselves, because we're not about telling people what to do, but just to really increase our vocabulary around is your life working for you? You'll know whether it is or whether
and what's also super important is that chances are if you are in an abusive relationship, you probably don't know it is abusive. You know, statistics say that you probably don't know. And so, you know, that walking on eggshells, that hypervigilance, you know, adapting to their behaviour, paying attention, do they look angry? Has she walked in that mood, or he, or whatever? That's you might think that's normal. Oh, they're just tired, or it's just a stressful time. No, there are people out there who have COVID stress, who have financial stress, who have all of that, and they do not treat their partners that way.
Yeah, there's a big difference, isn't there?
If there's power and control, that's abuse.
You know, the more I read and research around trauma in the way we take control of our own life, or in fact we fall into the trap of allowing another human being to control our life. It all comes back to being an impact of having some unresolved trauma in our life. I know that's
you've
what
nailed
the doctors
it.
And
You've nailed it. Yeah. You know, when I went to my counsellor, you know, I said to her, I'm an intelligent woman. How come? What was I thinking? You know, and it really is about the stacking. You know, it's generational trauma. You might have had lots of accidents as a kid, or you know, but for me, for you to be open to being controlled and abused, have a look at your childhood. And it might not have been that you were sexually assaulted or, you know, physically assaulted. However, if you didn't feel safe, and it was a daily didn't feel safe, you weren't acknowledged, you were ignored or whatever, that can be in itself a trauma-inducing childhood, where you just have this innate, I'm wrong, I'm not safe. Someone help me.
Mm. Yeah. And that can come from, you know, like even in my case, you know, having a busy parent. You know, my mum, by the time I was born, she had, I think I was number 4, but by the time the 5th one came along, the first one was only about 5, 5.5 or something. And you just don't have time, because as a human being, we know that babies need touch and connection to thrive. We know that if they don't get that and are left in a cot, then they can actually die. They have found that. So
exactly, you need touch.
Even if they're being fed, but they're not being picked up and held, and you know, so it's an interesting thing coming from big families, or even a parents who've been struggling themselves and haven't been able to provide that themselves. So it's good, and it's good just to have a look, see if there's something there for us. Hey, it doesn't mean we're saying, yeah, you know, just go looking. It's only if you choose. We all have a choice.
It's just being willing to acknowledge. And the beautiful thing is that if you do it from a place of no judgment, if you do it from a place of curiosity and a willingness to create something different. So, you know, it's not about actually, I'll tell you a funny story in relation to one of my kids. So we communicate via a platform, and an online platform, and I'm really very dyslexic, and it's quite funny that, you know, even when I type in something, you know how normally if you're remotely close, Google will say, do you mean this?
Yes.
Well, I'm the sort of person that Google doesn't say that. It just goes, huh? It highlights it, but it's like, we've got no choices for you, but we're just highlighting this does not make sense. And I had sent something to my son really quickly, and I was driving over to his place, and I got there and we're both sitting on the couch, and he said, oh, Mum, you were so funny what you wrote. And so we normally just laugh about things like that, not in a mean way. It's just sometimes funny, the stuff that I actually write. And so I pulled out my phone, and he's got his, because I've literally just walked in, and there's a way you can edit. So I picked up the phone and I changed the word, and so it's changed in real time. And so I thought it was funny, right? So I go, what word? And he looks and he goes, huh? Right? And then I said to him straight away, like literally straight away, I just went, honey, I just changed it. It was, you know, and he turned to me and he goes, Mum, that's gaslighting. And I just went, oh my gosh, it is.
Oh, yeah,
it is, because I made him question his reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this is one thing I do want to say. When you've been brought up with, whether it's histrionics or, you know, an unstable personality or whatever, you will have echoes. And if you know how they say, if you've got an alcoholic in the family, you can either be really against it or end up being an alcoholic. So, you know, I'm very open with my kids, as you can tell. And so I looked at him and I just went, honey, I'm really sorry. You're correct. That is gaslighting. I'll never do that again. And I won't. And so that's the thing where it's not about, I don't feel bad about that. I don't feel wrong about that. And he's been brought up to not make people wrong. He acknowledged what it was, and he was willing for me to say, no, it's not because of this, this, and this. And if it was true, what I came back with, he would accept that if it was energetically true. Yeah. Right? But he was correct. It was gaslighting. I didn't know it at the time, but it is. So this is where we need to – sorry, go.
Yeah, just be present and listen to what somebody else's point of view was, which you did beautifully.
And also they can, I was just going to say, and also they can have a point of view and it's not true.
You're true,
right?
Yeah.
You need to be okay with that as well. You need to be okay with that it wasn't gaslighting, and I'm okay with it not being gaslighting, even though he thinks it is. But in this regard, he was correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And well done to both of you for being open to, you're right.
Well, that's creation. That is creation, because no one's right or wrong. Yeah. It's just that he acknowledged.
So it created a better relationship between you and your son.
You know what? We're having a full circle moment, because remember at the start of the podcast I said you've got to come into any form of communication with a willingness to change.
Yes.
And if I did not come in with that willingness to change, a typical response would have been, because I didn't mean it that way. If you had asked me in my heart, did I mean that as a gaslighting? No way. It was just a funny thing in my head, right? So if I wasn't willing to change, if I wasn't willing to see a different point of view, I would have done the normal thing of like, I didn't mean, that's ridiculous. I'm not, that was just a joke. Relax, Jay. Like, come on.
Yes.
And that's what we do. And then, of course, then he's invalidated. He knows what's true for him. Then that's what creates more separation. Whereas actually being willing to change, what that does for him is it shows him he's safe, secure and supported to speak up and name something. And also he's greater for it and our relationship's greater for it. And then I'm greater for it because I've now got a different way where that echo of gaslighting that I was married into and also, had exposure to, I can recognize, that's another echo. I won't ever do that again to anybody in that way because I've learnt. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say,
like
honey?
No, I was just thinking that, in wrapping up, to talk about, some home play, but just before that, I did a little highlight about controlling the controllable. And it brought home to me about how many of us around the world really have been living in a fear, but most of it's outside our control. And we all know that the effects of that, when you feel like you're out of control, it does lead to more cortisol and drip feeding into our bodies. So, trying to keep ourselves well and our immune system strong, we have to actually look closely at what is within our control and what isn't, hey? So what do you think we could do for some home play this week?
Oh, man, I got so much to say from what you just said, but we're running out of time. So what is home play? What do you think? I'm going to throw it back at you.
Yeah, okay. Well, what about just educating ourselves on, what control and coercion actually is?
What it smells like.
Yeah, what it smells like. And acknowledging it, and if you have had some experience of it, this is what you've said, and everyone that I've researched and read books about it, they all say to speak it out because it's only when it's in the darkness that it relies on that.
Absolutely, yeah. When you're willing to call out the shame or call out the, be vulnerable. I like that. Yeah, educate yourself, and maybe just this week look at yourself, and if you're chatting with your kids or your lover, are you bringing an agenda in? And you don't necessarily, depending on your level of vulnerability and safety, you just acknowledge it to yourself. Wow, actually, I'm going into this business meeting because I want this to happen. So what if I actually just acknowledge that and be open to change? Be open because there might be something even greater that's possible. That's beyond your.
I do like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are two things. Perhaps you haven't been impacted by trauma, but you just know you could feel better than you currently feel. Well, perhaps make a point of just looking for the joy in every day. And if you have been impacted, look for somebody who specialises in trauma-informed healing.
I love that. That is perfect.
Well, that's great. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to hearing what our listeners think about all this and what they can see that we can't see.
Absolutely. Have a beautiful week and take care. Bye.
Bye now.